Is everybody good to get started?
Just downloading.
All right, round this up. You good?
No, just downloading.
Just let me.
Sweet. All right, oh, thank you. Sorry.
Advantage 1, inequality. The affordable characters of medical corporate dominance in healthcare. Minimum regulation, high doctor plans only extend to a deep racial income-based disparities. Himmel sign all 17. Poor Americans says rural healthcare. Wealthy Americans many uninsured by covered expansion. Do they rising premiums cost account no matter which case or in any household debt in bankruptcy? For they say so need to mitigate healthcare and healthcare inequalities. Economic inequalities begin searches in inequality in healthcare. Life is cutting gap between the rich and poor, providing the top 0.1% oxygen all wealth and now control much wealth the bottom 90%. The wealth and economy racial ethnic group 7 times greater income inequality. Healthcare is often affects economic inequality by living high quality care at all. Rise costs of both incomes. Disparities in access to high rates of insurance and inadequate insurance. 27 million Americans went uninsured by covered expansion. Uninsured for more likely to forget need treatment because of the cost. Care for government cost by increased general health problems. They say little certain expended for the bond specific expenditure. Middle cost is flying. Increased qualities apply from several from improved access. Quality kills versus ethnic minors. The healthcare is substantially larger share of the poor than the wealthy exacerbating inequalities disposable income. Healthcare is simply defined as primary income tax because of those relying on private insurance and out-of-pocket payments are regressive. The uninsured pay more for the out-of-pocket because they don't have insurance to go to level insurance the highest pricing. Healthcare finances willing to make a face medical bills and debt. Medical bills major crypto household debt in bigger comprising more than half. Financial catastrophe increased mortality blemishes random credit reports for years. Comprehensive access to credit. Comprehensive studies prove that insurance is the most crucial factor in accessing care. So it out 2017 lack of insurance cost of 10,000 deaths. Works on the different state deaths to compare 3 states of one Medicaid expansion finding 6% decreased mortality. 77,000 people getting coverage for 4 to 5 years of follow-up. 25% reduction for slow portability plus become mortality rates and have evidence of case coverage expansion significantly improve patients' access to care and lose preventive care. These increased predisposing multifaceted nuanced measures healthcare. Cumulative change to occur in some of these changes multiple health 10,000 people live longer lives. Positive reduced coverage of the same harms to health. These studies probably the best evidence we have. Specifically, healthcare costs are the biggest driver of income inequality. Wasteful spending decreases wages and benefits to wealthy. Where Shosky Bigs 14 health costs biggest driver of income inequality. America today when employees cost benefits rise, the whole lack of salary increasing. Compensation increased by 20%. The employee health insurance costs rose by 51%. Health costs biggest share of total compensation. Lowers wage because of the rising health costs hit their salaries the most. The result is higher income inequality. Inequality total compensation failure change rising health costs hold back the growth of lower middle class earnings. Spending is basically overused to truly hurt does hurt the poor and the rich. Much more significant compensation going to health benefits lessening under the pockets. Healthcare is the key sector for redistribution. Poor health drives chronic unemployment. Progressive taxation and state responsibility for healthcare costs creates aggregate demands necessary for full employment. Done in 2008. The post-Keynesian point to chronic unemployment excess capacity carried us industrialized country. Launching those rates from 18% to the most price. Very high utility price are to great guys of disguised unemployment. Poverty and health can be part of the downward vicious cycle of causation. Robust sluggish market adjustment levels affect demand transition into structural unemployment. Expenditure be undertaken for social value to prevent downward cycle of human causation. Health expenditure represent a prime component of public spending aggregate demand. Public health expenditure are independent level distribution to aggregate demand. A major part of any stabilization policy. Healthcare investment contribute to productivity, economic growth, and macroeconomic stability. And permanent life expenditure contribute to 4% increase in output. Expenditure increase human capital. Macroeconomic benefits that flow from one individual to others make multipliers, greater tax revenues, virtually full employment assumptions. Advanced economies operate with chronic unemployment excess capacity. Healthcare spending is financed primarily through general taxation is more progressive and equitable. Finance healthcare expenditure, whole tax reduces tax distortion, the economy lowers administration transaction costs. The gross injustice of healthcare and economic inequality threatens global well-being. Our moral imagination must focus on the long-term equality of essential public goods. Benetar 2013, the rule is characterized by crisis in health, education, energy, water, food security, the economy, the environment, the cost of organic global crisis, cause rate device, and the federal advantage growth, rate of poverty, justice, gender agreement, the ethical requirements, international system, relief poverty, improve the health, digital values, display productivity, ignoring these principles for action with the wisdom available, resources to reduce injustice billions of people, hyper individuals in terms of demands for immediate gratification, endless economic expectations, and short-term horizons and dangerous future for all of us. Distortion values system rights from erosion, social cohesion regarding the aspiration of fairness as well as solidarity. Consumer goods increasingly viewed as having part of essential public goods. The 400 U.S. billionaires own more than 155 million Americans combined. Disparities with health are wide in the U.S. and all wealthy countries. With increasing commodification, much of the value of life is gained by turning goods and marketable commodities. The world is running increasingly unstable, and a world in which lives are reciprocally devoured by the poverty, moralization, and ignores the concept of social justice and distribution of resources. Buchanan Friends against such a firm for a social moral epistemology. They consider us individuals suffer to the extent which the institutional frameworks are based factually correct concepts. Pervasiveness is moral corrosion. Institutions lies probation, no practice opposed to daunting problems. Addressing the mere require reframe the way we see ourselves. The impacts of inequality for greater than that of even a nuclear conflict. Leave 2016, we can avoid structural violence. People can be conscious limitations, social structures imposed. 18 million deaths a year can be achieved with structural violence. Even help the nuclear chain, 232 million people get out compared with structural violence. Every 15 years, as many people die because of poverty, the nuclear war. The nuclear war genocide perpetuated the weakest war. Disparity class, the most important cause of behavior, violence, suicide, homicide, warfare, capital punishment. Universal insurance coverage is the foundation of right to healthcare. I would ensure high quality outcomes to redistribute wealth. Ruger 2009, universal health insurance coverage is fundamental health care of the new paradigm. All cash rest medical testing, medical purpose, not ability to pay. Uncertain cash right costs need to redistribute resources, wealth, rich and the poor. Place principle in the center of healthcare financing. The paradigm requires financing organization deliveries access to medically necessary, medically appropriate care and protected individuals with health-related financial burdens. The society distributes healthcare resources according to individuals' health capability, not accounting ethnicity, not how much money they have. Equitable health system requires financial protection. Individuals, especially the poor, gets monetary burdens. Individuals not always make rational decisions. They find difficult to assess health risks and how to know how much insurance they need. Insurance is essential for flourishing. A universal health insurance coverage, redistribution of taxation, redistribution of ethical and universal health insurance. A right to healthcare would frame health policy around an ethical commitment to the health capability paradigm that prioritizes human functioning agency. This necessitates expansive public financing and regulation. Ruger 16, the healthcare capability paradigm promotes ethical commitment, the right to healthcare. The commitment sees right to health as a basis and inspiration for new specific legislation. Will seize an ethical claim. Obligation involves an interest in the statement of capabilities, freedoms, operation in terms of health needs, health functioning, health agency, and health capabilities, not purposes, desires, or utilities. Paradigm rests on ethical commitment, the part of law, without redistributing resources from the world of the wealthy and less fortunate from the world of the sick would not be possible. Any states must strengthen human rights. Human rights will perfect and perfect obligation. Reason involves dialogue. We need collective action for public finance and regulation. Friction also requires regulation and oversight. Thus, the plan. The United States federal government should establish a right to healthcare for all residents of the United States. Advantage 2 is TRIPS. Establishing a right to healthcare adjusts TRIPS plus intellectual property protections and U.S. free trade agreements that ensures access to essential medicines in countries currently priced out of pharmaceutical innovation through sale and local development. Bought 2008 mechanisms including power protection, proven unsuccessful protection, for access to essential medicine, flexibility, utilized. The right to develop nations for retaliation. Article requires good produce pursuant to compulsory licensing be used for domestic murder countries able to officially produce drugs cannot export. First, electric drug manufacturer the ability to issue a compulsory licensing was large academic to help their countries to policy change to create a waiver that allowed countries to export generic versions. The regime seems to have struck a power balance between interest patent holders the right to health. USA Party 17 free trade agreements, each choice plus version, choice plus in America. The FTAs include limiting the exclusion of patent ability, requiring the granted patents for new use of known compounds, and requiring the extension of patent terms, permitting parallel importation, limiting the grounds which compulsory license may be granted, permitting the prosecution, non-violation, or impairment claim trading partners and party least developed countries agree to such agreements because they hope that acquiescing to U.S. demands will help them gain leverage and make trade agreements upset the balance of the right to healthcare and IP rights essential antiretroviral drugs remain prohibitively expensive. One way to gain the balance of power is to force a change in U.S. policy. There was no effective legal mechanism for promising such a change. The U.S. was not bound by the right to health. TRIPS established a minimal level of patent protection. The parties enhance access to essential medicine cannot be given legal force. Free trade agreements subsequent to TRIPS severely restrict access to medicine. Price points have become a matter of life or death. Formed in 2008 before TRIPS, 40 countries patent process, only patent process, non-products, and no patents for less than 20 years. These mechanisms and how the contested countries are being coerced and drugs and stronger intellectual property rules that make TRIPS more restrictive, make it more difficult generic medicine to enter the market. TRIPS also restricting global access to generic alternative by phasing out generic manufacturing and authorizing under TRIPS. Affordable pricing and one determined less. Patents are primary determining price, and price can be a primary determinant drug access. The impacts of patents on pricing illustrated by the fact that the drug price falls sharply when patents expire and generic entries deals more competition. Pricing can influence availability. A very expensive drug likely purchased by a poor government or receive national financing. The impact of pricing and financing underscores the fact that high drug key medicines companies like cancer, diabetes, well out of reach of those who need them. Coercive and stringent TRIPS plus restrictions on the norm and decimate generic competition in pharmaceutical innovation. U.S. free trade agreements are critical. Cohen, Colorado, 2008. Limit use of TRIPS flexibility is not surprising given the likelihood of retaliatory punitive sanctions. Increasing the number of countries that undertake TRIPS plus intellectual property protections. TRIPS plus norms are global market rate, which estimates IP increasing some by the U.S. They greatly restrict market competition. The U.S. included bilateral regional trade agreements including TRIPS plus students with over 60 countries. Major supply coverage generic medicines will include future agreements that prevent using compulsory license for export. TRIPS plus centers increase being required development countries access to Western investment, trade, and aid. Aggressive TRIPS plus agenda has strong scrutiny. This actually impeded development use of new technologies. U.S. instead mounted an effort to address problems of basic IP enforcement and dumping countries with adequate law enforcement infrastructure. Impact innovation has likely been destructive as well. The lax IP protection has the compound salutary effect of both ensuring greater access to innovative products in the short run and stimulating industrial development in the form of imitator industries, which are reliable precursors to innovative industrial expansion. The broader impact of restriction and TRIPS flexibility are under appropriate circumstances a delay of introduction during medicine to generic producers. Neglected tropical diseases specifically affect 1.4 billion people and condemn 35,000 deaths every single day. Correcting for market failure is necessary. Title 16, the systematic prioritization of the world's poor national agenda. This can be simply a global concern the way our economy functions. Some of the 35,000 people every single day who die. Entities impact over 1.4 billion people. Zero devastating neglected control programs like funding weak healthcare systems, subsidiary type of capacity, there's essentially collaboration. Market force field incentivized research. That's what 1.1% of new drugs were for neglected disease by the fact that these diseases be 12% of global diseases. Establishing a right to healthcare would obligate Congress to implement universal coverage. The court will ensure enforcement. Sandu 2007, establishing a right to healthcare. The Constitution of the South African Canadian Space on the constitutional argument that such right would be non-justiciable or interfere with separation of powers. Establishing a right to healthcare ensure access. First, the prosecution just ability to force Congress to justify resource decision, let bureau decision making process. Second, the court will order the government to provide service and relative and so where the failure to provide service and the result unequal application reasonable. Finally, when a court declined to serve the position of political branch, the more enforcement continuing to uphold the government to action for the political inertia by the decline, a judicially enforceable right to healthcare is best chance overcoming a market failure, democratic failure. Establishing a legal right to healthcare to push the political branches to tell the program to achieve the goal of comprehensive access to care for all. A right to healthcare solves is enforceable. Stacey, 1993. The thesis that positive rights are compatible can be challenged on a number of grounds. This creates a number of positive rights against no general bar. Denies the fact that the distinction between negative and positive rights makes sense because the negative rights can be given positive and vice versa. Find a more fundamental response that the text should be binding. The best basis of the constitutional authority is not morally justified. Typical arguments such as extremely limited judicial role, elaboration, enforcement. Courts can declare the Constitution without addressing the question whether justice requires it. This leaves the method of the political branch as a supervised role will be limited. Courts should limit the assurance that the political branch shall adopt a serious systematic plan. Limited judicial role accommodates the consideration recognized proper role of the courts. Disperse political branch to give more weight to constitutional values. It avoids administrative constitution with the rights that individuals may enforce on a case-by-case basis. Rights to healthcare generate new democratic collectives. Rights to language use care to subvert dominant understandings of liberal democracy. LVL 2015 relationship between individual struggles against subordination, collective social movements, generic conceptual normative resources. Collective claiming of rights confine the motivation of democratic engagement. Rights have rights and political products is something we do. However, conceiving rights as affirmative rights offer the rebuttal objection. The women's rights care would be your emphasize of reproductivity of motherhood. Claims to right care to rights enhances democratic practice because sort of counterbalance the dominant repressive discourse. Care rights reveals whether should be rights varying individuals and those with no or fewer rights. Claiming rights has now become dominant discourse politics. This is because it is through making rights that new political activities constitute rights. Claiming is practice allows people to contest and reconstitute to common sense. So that card is going to be marked at reconstitute common sense, which is the very last line.
Good for your prospects?
Yeah.
My questions are going to be a lot about the stand-new evidence, which indicates that the Supreme Court can enforce the right to health. So let me know if this is the pathway that it would take for the Supreme Court to enforce it. Someone has their right to health violated either through people not or refusing to give them health care. They go to the court to say, hey, my right was violated, and the court says, hey, we need to enforce health care. Is that the way that it
No,
goes?
that's not the way it happens, because the affirmative fiats the establishment of right to healthcare and the creation of a universal public insurance system.
Okay,
so it's
so-
not a toothless right that if it is violated, you go to court. Rather, solvency is predicated on the one AC and the fiating of the creation
How
of a
does
universal insurance system.
fiat ensure that doctors won't discriminate against disabled people when disabled people walk into the office?
Yeah, so there's a number of responses. First, the fiat thing I just said. Second,
How
rights,
is,
the rights
I'm sorry,
framework.
that's a very important question. Explain that.
Yes, so
In
the-
interpersonal interactions, how do you fiat through those?
Okay, so when I say fiat through, obviously we don't fiat changing doctors' minds. We fiat the creation of a universal insurance system that is adequately funded, that provides everybody an adequate right to healthcare. Second, the rights claim and the rights framing proves that's a useful springboard to pushing further momentum.
Okay.
Third, any recognition of social economic precedents would absolutely change dominant political discourse and ensure future
makes
gains.
sense.
And then finally, legal recourse is possible
would-
in the form of civil suits, in the form of class action suits.
Exactly.
in the form
Okay.
of
So
action.
people, so in those class action lawsuits, people would say, "My rights were violated. Here's where I was injured. Please give me compensation."
Well, it's not necessarily compensation, it's that the government would be not
enforce.
meeting its right to healthcare,
Yes.
and therefore would have to
Okay,
improve
this is
the
all I
system,
wanted from this question.
build new hospitals, build.
In addition
structure
to
content
court
training,
enforcement,
so-
would there be an independent agency to oversee this federally sponsored healthcare program?
I mean, we didn't specify an agency overseeing it, we said that it'd be done by the federal
How
government.
much
and it'd be done by
money
courts
would
and
this
Congress.
cost, hypothetically?
It would enough to ensure medically appropriate and necessary care for everybody, which would certainly be a substantial.
Who
sum of money.
determines what services get covered?
It would be comprehensive. Our evidence says it'd be medically necessary, medically appropriate medical
Who
services.
defines what
which
is medically
comprehensive.
necessary?
Our Sandu and Rudy cards say that.
Say what? Who defines what is medically
So
necessary?
it's a very comprehensive package of services, because right now the status quo, for example, under the ACA, essential minimum coverage is, 10 essential health benefits. That's
Mhm.
clearly not gonna cut it in the case of reproductive rights, in the case of people not getting sufficient checkups, et cetera. So there's no
Okay.
deductibles, no copay, very comprehensive service. That's the point of
Okay.
a
Who de-
massive right to healthcare that
For
everybody
sure.
needs for human
Who
flourishing.
determines where healthcare centers or hospitals get placed?
What do you mean where they get placed? It's based on the right to healthcare. So for example, a
So-
very wealthy community, like
Yep.
if you have MD Anderson nearby, clearly there's not gonna be a new hospital built, but if you live in Southside Chicago, it's far more likely that your right to healthcare would not be enforced, and therefore there'd have to be the affirmative in order to establish new hospitals, new training
Yeah, but
doctors in the case where it's inadequate.
Exactly, but who determines that those health centers do get placed in the south
Well,
side?
we just said the federal government, we said the court is the overseer of the system, and Congress
sure.
would be obligated because of the moral force of the opinion.
So the enforcement of the affirmative comes back to the court to be able to make ethical decisions
Yeah,
on
we have
placement,
said the court
services,
plays
and
a
costs.
vital, we have said the court plays a vital role in ensuring that this whole system works.
Good. It's good for us.
Hold on.
Who did you? Chris. Take some of that, Chris. Yeah, that's perfect.
What do you want case at?
Sorry, yeah, it's gonna be, inequality then. Yeah, it's possible.
You said one, okay?
Yep.
Just pulling it up. Okay.
Debating the details of universal healthcare only brings closer to Trump care. The affirmative is adopted the same terrain of public policy discourse, which has been wilted down by the extreme exclusions over time. Only conversation with dominant discourse that structures the parameter of political organizations really transform healthcare. Helio 6. The healthcare debate should not be viewed as a rational dispute between promotes two alternatives, class or two containing versions of fancy articulated in the single terrain discourse. The two positions within the healthcare foreign debate are united by comments about whether they share the same ideas about the nature of the individual, society, and the economy, the respective relation to healthcare and its role in producing well-being. Discourse functions to produce control reality by means of towards exclusions that define what is possible to say and what is inconceivable. The healthcare foreign debate focuses on particular spaces and actors and defining the healthcare sector like crisis, excluding other spaces and actors such as family caregivers, effort to reform social transformation as compensation for dominant discourse politics is enterprise transforming the medium institutional power by shifting the right towards exclusions that govern a discourse and the affirmative advocacy for a healthcare system absent evidence is a product of phantasmal idealization. Don't vote for a rhetorically palatable way or that is divorced from contextual reality or risk co-option by special interests. Roll back to the plan the creation of a healthcare system will be designed to create resilient neoliberal subjects for hockey debt. Public healthcare policies must not be tested against reality, must therefore remain a serious to each organization that will implement the healthcare policy must be idealistic to fulfill the possible goal of the healthcare system. Split between policies and organizational reality operate to protect us from coming terms on realistic policy demands and every construction of policy making leads to multiple splits and ultimately underscores inspired patient choices shows and highlight the difficulty of translating value in systems into organizational reality. Politics and blame healthcare professionals for not meeting the impossible. Health professionals are pitted against each other. Those who not accept responsibilities for their health sources are exempted from preserving users as are stigmatized and refuse treatment. It gives conceptual tools to explore how the inherent idealization involved in articulating aspirational policy objectives might enable policy capture by powerful political groups and organizations and organize interests for their own ideological and political ends. And until we change the foundational assumptions of how we approach healthcare reform and debate, we will ensure that any proposed change will go unrealized and like the result of its opposite. Helio 6. Healthcare reform discourse to accept, understand, just or contain the desires of patients, provide or represent them as a split ambivalent subject. The choice we represent with to accept how these social exclusions in the current system makes the system more the universal alternative where constraint will be imposed on all. What we are confronted with is not a rational debate between contending positions, but contending social fantasies that remain regrettably unrealized. Healthcare reform discourse instead of the application of reason to the problem of scarcity constantly runs the risk of generating its own opposite. The subject of reform discourse are trapped between trying to get it right and the insistence that getting right is impossible. And we must not ask how to provide healthcare better, but discursively and libidinally change the way we collectively think about what healthcare is, the impact history of policy bearing the exception of the last Western 15. The libidinal economy shapes and limits organized healthcare delivery. This focus on how to improve that delivery is not but wrong question because it begins with the assumption healthcare is given a fixed object and focus on the restricted to how to deliver this object but more efficiently. This is rather than a way of thinking that limits what can be changed only delivery method, not the object itself. The real question is how to change the idea of healthcare. What the idea of healthcare is liberated from the tyranny of an ideology, maintains specific interest only then will change the curve. The libidinal economy that underpins today's NHS is organized around desire pure response to NHS is the kind of caring and which saves us from pain and death. All this is provided for free to all citizens. The birthright is a effective attachment to NHS by the nation gather investments what the nation enjoys its judgment while at the failings of NHS and our alternatives to approach this year's topic through a diverse economy that takes the informal network to care into policy conversations starting point. This allows us to theorize them into being and better provide care for those that actually need it. Helio 6. Policy recommendations include more formal training for caregivers, better access to paid assistance, better information, and more public awareness of the value of caregiving. Caregivers are uniquely motivated, subject beyond duty and privileges. Sure might lead to a question. All their care providers, this imagination process would allow us to theorize these subject care and bring them into being healthy in diverse economy, unsettle some of the foundational terms that define healthcare reform, debate the practice of the analysts who use the momentary openings, the unconscious towards the avalanche to interrupt and the circuit of efficiency and unshakable stalemate to state markets. These such interruptions, we might be in a position to suggest other ways of making sense of the healthcare, other ways of producing, allocating, receiving resources to create some alternative. We need to put these different desires, relation to practice and spaces into a differential, a different theoretical context, so they might be linked together in new ways. We are confronted with prohibition of the impossible care seen as social cost that must be contained because the demand for care is infinite. This trial takes on a repetitive circular quality because there is always more factor in recognizing the simple fact allows us to proceed in a way we're not confronted with impossible infinite demand, but with a finite demand for a particular group of people. Perhaps not only through a shift in attitude will we be able to bring about creativity and use of social resource to produce care for the people who need it. The one I see is an overcoming narrative that refuels the political tank while erasing the possibility of resistance. They recreate the logic of rehabilitation and erases subject formation and gets violently co-opted to Boulder 13. The colorism is natural, assumed to be for good, the opportunity for critiques of anything foreclose overcoming stories of business and no bad news story, they refill the text of speak audiences feel nobly but and ethically superior for supporting called rehabilitation and overcoming story that overall on an racial or power relations undergirds terrorism is compulsory because it affects strategy and normalization review the contradiction inherent in positioning individuals everyday heroes compulsory heroes and strict person individuality race complex experiences and symbolize complex social issues the overcoming narrative is own church our cultural collective culture imaginary many people can even imagine different story like compulsory heroism obscure social ethics social histories material realities equality discourse empowerment discourse survivorship for financial and political ends and norm as we continue to establish reform and reinforce a challenge interrupt its iteration to open up space for influx stories knowledge and perspective that we can begin to imagine and when I see the attempt to unrestrict the bonds of ecologically humanization intervention into social issues their securitization requires the name and naming and commodification codification of what it means to be healthy Mangos and 14 Biomedical events in the last century have shifted the public health to another aspect care individual cause of manifestation unless we have to translate knowledge gain and lessons learned from medicalization of human condition and preventive measures that go beyond what we think is beneficial for health not just the individual level but ultimately at the population level. The only way to get human service paid for reimbursed is to find a condition and medical problem thereby creating incentive to medicalize more problems and medicalization human conditions therefore influences healthcare spending indefinitely with increasing cost skilled unknown results services will become available or accessible for individuals diagnosed with health problem. The political drive several medicalization to address vulnerabilities by increasing access to medicalization of human conditions steps for the individualization of social problem, making social or environmental interventions either ignored or secondary and reinforces technical fixing for complex problems and the act causes worse health outcomes and creates vulnerable populations from hidden from public health surveillance. Bastion 13. Recession find adversely affect health. One is economic challenges, unemployment, unpayable debt has found career, deferment of medical care. There may be vulnerable populations hidden from public health surveillance, crude mortality rate, decline, mass hidden public health problems, newly unemployed people entering the public health insurance precisely when programs see less funding, revenue streams evaporate, and then erodes the social safety net. Durable fiat is and infinite spending across economic environments. Being fully funded in a recession means less covered elsewhere. Boosted 10. Collapse of housing has considerable impact on funding who pay for health services in a recession. Government thinks to lower healthcare budget pays by themselves unable to pay past stress and show the impact of here than the mortality 7% higher. This is most likely related to the magnitude of crisis and reduction in public sector medical services trips. The affirmative securitization against death, disease, and active ableist violence, the fear scenario makes activists in the abstract they are predicated enabled by insecurity of their own vulnerabilities and active securitization and disabled people to use well. Ableism is the hijacked aspirational body of civilized humanity is cast from the increasingly stringent norms and rules about the emotional behavior and bodily display that are take social relations, disabilities, the opposite ideal body in the kingdom of clean proper body, the clean and proper has powerful social consequences, most manifestation normalizing in dynamics, the ableist body helps on disabled people cope with their fears, whether or corporate vulnerabilities cross roads, the civil insensibility of warrants the present possible contaminant, psychological and social distance between disability and non-disability expands disability signals the present impairment or reason sickness, monstrosity, objection, death, all the repulsive body characteristics that civilization reviews point blank separating, seeks desperately disavowedly punitive nor embodied in the hygienic drive toward an homogeneous hijack culture demands many sacrifices, able to view our sacrifices rather than avoid the kind of conformity as a prerequisite for appropriate social participation and the focus on global health and discursive securitization and disease and access to risks undermine cooperation forces for decision making increases discrimination mature 16. The exertion global health authority refer to an awareness that an event and where the pose a potential threat to world population, national security, other countries, especially the U.S. and heightened security, as well as erosion, multilateral securitization, internal opposition, threat existence, wide, measures and technical administrational procedures that can escape democratic security, and thus have broad legal regress and security can threaten democracy, human rights, depicting the bulls of threat and national security.
Where is that? Security.
Yeah, like, it's the second big block of text depicting the bull as a threat of
Oh, got it, yeah.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Your Healy evidence, the first card, assumes a limited framework for debate in which all arguments share the same ideas about society, individuals, economy, etc. And that's why it says we're the same as the AC. Can you explain how the affirmative shares the same ideas as repealing and replacing Obamacare?
Yeah, sure, right, because our argument is there becomes in the current the healthcare debates, right, there becomes this depiction between the state versus the free market, right, that is the dichotomy that is created. Our argument is both of those ideas of the state versus the free market reinstitute the idea of the healthy, free individual
So it's not just
citizen.
state market, because your Healy card says that, quote, the reason it's problematic is because care is seen as a social cost that must be constrained. How do you think the affirmative said costs must be cut and, quote, in your evidence, fat must be trimmed in the healthcare sector?
Okay, you're talking about our last
That's the
video?
quote in your alternative card.
Sure,
The reason
in
it's
our
bad is
alternative card,
because
right, because the reason for that, right, is sure, even if that isn't the affirmative, our argument is that logic comes from the notion that healthcare must be an infinite demand, which is the affirmative. It assumes that there is an infinite need for healthcare, thus we must have an infinite response,
Well, okay,
which
so-
causes
so
the backlash of the
demand in economic language
Right.
is clearly different than saying everybody should have healthcare. We're not saying that, it changes the way we understand
that
aggregate
framing
demand, et
of
cetera.
it. Sure.
So how can those
Yeah.
possibly be the same thing?
So
'Cause under
what
AC
Healy says is the call for universal healthcare. The notion that everyone needs and should have healthcare, that healthcare is a universal need, is what causes and reinstitutes the backlash of the conservative response of we need to cut costs.
Can you explain that part? Because Healy never says universal healthcare. Healy's
Yes.
writing in 2006 talking about like Obamacare
No,
versus,
no, it literally is a dichotomy between market reformers and people who view healthcare as a right, which is literally the affirmative.
Okay,
You're
so
wrong on that.
my next question. The Western evidence you read that's about the NHS says the problem with the NHS is that it's like a form of jouissance because the NHS is being cut. So it looks like the government's doing something good,
No,
but in reality,
that's-
it's
no,
not.
that's-
How is it the F? Because
So
the F does
what,
not get cut.
what Western says is that there becomes what he calls a Lacanian twist to the affective affirmation of NHS, of national health insurance, i.e. it is an affective attachment when it is being affirmed, when it is being created, but when it is being rejected, when it is being criticized, that also creates that kind of reverse affective attachment that also
Okay.
reifies the national sentiment of this is our healthcare, we
That
need
makes
to
sense.
protect it.
I find that when asked about these bastard cards on case, it's the idea of this card is that newly unemployed people enter into public health insurance and then revenue streams evaporate. So people without employment should not be in the healthcare system because it would cost too much. If this is a debate about language, why should these cards be valid at all when you have criticized the cost-cutting framework?
This will provide the meat on our bones.
These
for
are like
our
two
legal arguments
conservative
because-
hacks in a debate where you have
have
said cost-cutting is
speaking over
bad.
me. Our argument is that you have divorced the contextual reality and the way single payer gets deployed from the idealization of the 2AR rhetorically powerful save all the people suffering from income inequality. That's not how the real world works.
Just really quick, can the alternative do the affirmative to establish a right to healthcare?
No. It could result in different forms of healthcare, but not the way the app has presented it, or
Definitely
single
doesn't
payer
result in
national health
healthcare.
insurance. in the
Could
way
it do
the app-
government healthcare at all?
It could.
Yeah,
It's
we
like a frame.
definitely-
It's a frame of analysis. So we don't prescribe a solution that the government should do, but rather a way that the government should look.
This is
at it.
definitely not a government.
9:38.
Is it 9:30?
You're saying you're done.
Hmm?
You say you're done.
Yeah. Yep.
Whichever one's
Just to, best possible average.
Yeah, I know, that was definitely better than it could, that was the one that
I saw my
popped out
coffee
for-
fly, and I'm like, oh, no.
No.
I also don't know what else is doing in paperless screen for the most part, I'm just making a speech track, everything else goes way away from now.
Not bad, just telling you that. Cool breath.
Did you send it over?
Yeah. The eighth battle.
Oh, who's in line?
And then AA is being over VHS, what weird discussion.
People happy with that? Yeah, they went back to this building being announced first, and I left before they announced.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody realized that they're announcing the teams that was already out of it first, why are we doing that? Like, pretty big. Well, the report was so fast that we
Sarah starts spreading when she's halfway through it. I'm just
Yeah.
just release them.
Are we good?
Yeah. We're good for order.
Inequality, trips.
Is everyone good?
Yeah.
I looked around and people were just looking at me, so I'm like, okay, man, let me get this. Okay.
A right to healthcare issues due to card for progressive finance that solves inequalities and workshops can begin which prevents mortality. Also, people having healthcare is necessarily going to be good. I'll put the circumvention debate here just for cleanliness. One, it doesn't circumvent wonderful if the plan crisis establishment national health insurance does cross like super fair the concept that one sees advocates right to healthcare is a strong obligation. The government enforces a right that cannot be circumvented. It's not relying on expansive revolutionary court access. Stacey, this episode on prescription for source indicates in the worst case scenario still effective. Three, a right framing is a productive springboard for future action. If it's imperfect, it sets the stage for future movements. One is this argument about heroism on the app is obviously not heroic because Joseph and I are not advocating or overcoming some kind of villain. Second, there's no uniqueness because they need to input other stories as for their evidence. They don't do that. One in C2 is the medicalization to one social rights, and so the affirmative advocates of social rights is sufficient to check this. The next, the affirmative establishment right to healthcare and the health people repair challenges the private healthcare analysis to prioritize the full capabilities to flourishing lessons for rigorous is a pivot from status quo methods of delivery analysis. A capability model right to health and biomedical model are approach integrate social factors through biomedicine, with universal life courses, but cut a program level just because consumption, human health, and personability, choose activities, health, to make capabilities, to reject social health as the absence of these advocates, politics, social health, which play health to will give living health as intrinsic and instrumental of putting forward an interest argument for title of health, people to right health, consumption of health is not vulnerable, long-term criticism against the descent of health, capable of based on integration, individual biomedicine, novel social determinants region. We do not treat populations as problems, rather it's a challenge to how care has been distributed in the past, which shakes with arguments, and there are Cooper and Eller's evidence that concludes that movements can protest medical inequality, reduce fast reduce the black access to passive relationality, they lose within the role. Cooper and Eller's 17 medical communities engaged back like the words of mental dying, schema, momentary refuse to be instrumental medical institution where he says the evidently biomedicine for social relations, right connection between police brutality and reactions against healthcare system collective action, so spend also the potential risk of the relevant explicit implicit racism, clinical grounds, medical decision making. In the article, concludes that biomedical racism can be contested through commodification of care. Cooper and our 17 institution raising part of access to health, addressing rectify as usual basic common psychometric access to care. Various of hospital due privatization and increasing primary care during basic income and refusal of Medicaid patients. One in C3 is the argument that poor people should get health care, which one obviously is banned the concept of language because it's going to be conservative proposals approved across like second durable fiat means that people be able to spend enough money. That was also indicated that people get automatically necessary and appropriate care. The economy be damn free. This is the context of people moving into public health care. So since we get rid of employment-based law, which is sufficient to solve one issue for this was answered, but also the done evidence indicates that the only reason the recession would cause because inequality creates instability, the TRIPS advantage. U.S. patent protection is prioritized over people getting necessary medicines to treat neglected tropical diseases. The absence of reverse because right health would change the enforcement of this, which means that people get these drugs that save their lives. The impact is 16 million deaths yearly, which is pretty significant. One in C1 is the securitization disease. This card is tagged as an argument about ableism, so I'll answer this such. You can crossify the arguments about capabilities that are made on the other flow because this by second. This is not an argument of people being weak because of disease. Obviously, people should have health care, but that's not means it should be treated fully through capabilities to normalize functioning. 10 years, healthcare rights has high correlation to people from desirable courage, genetically consistent attitudes we care for the healthcare rights most significant for us. 15 healthcare is a good institution report because people can't compare to gain those approaches of incorporating full complex healthcare. Separation needed in terms of rich complexity of incorporating exercise moral quality is reflected by the fact truly care takes the most advantage for liberalism doesn't exclude the disabled and rights based on recognition of mutual vulnerability. But on 13 liberals will to support justice comes to disability 90 disabled citizens with respect for the common culture societies. There's consensus there is opportunities to distribute church by creating individuals not corporate members of societies. Those who have physical disabilities have the same rights of fellow citizens of the social environment. That's not accessible and limit their opportunities to receive benefits. The mentally disabled citizens are basic interests rejected by the law. That's fine. The 1SC2 is an argument about this securitization disease, which is a link to the affirmative because we do not make an argument about disease spreading. Rather, these diseases are not communicable, but they exist broadly. And the third world things like hookworm, for example, which means that any arguments they have about global spreading is false. The label of neglected tropes is determined research community for resources rather than viewing as a threat. It is a chronic thing, but will not spread to the U.S., which means that we are linked to the American and critical purity friends. We should learn health security should join critical traditional paradigm. Union portrait pro security central opposition side to traditional distance possible benefits right from works the other side by constitutional traditional security sides the other for close possible mutual learning approach to new telling visible spring new authorities about close to trade analysis security issue defense house an attitude pertinent just of self reflexive stressors knowledge tension high critique itself decay.
Case in ways both affect nations and response to uninsurance case self-death inequality. Insurance disincentive, alternative can affect social and universal insurance access, healthcare. The insurance drastically improves outcomes, reduces mortality numbers. And social insurance attacks the conditional nature of liberal contract theory. The conditioning private insurance guarantees greater discrimination and inequality. Harrison health period insurance rate work to maximum work, town treatment, society, economic social life. This is what states best insurance and primarily pulled insurance work by the legal discern free through rights. By instituting free through well-being, knowing there's material support. Beyond the law of contract users amplifies counter law by the basis of social organization underpins so and escapes legal regulation private insurance, associated insurance, boundary guarantee, and restoration through all through other protection of specific economic interests. Ethical decisions for private insurance focus on building risk of the population depth analysis, more and more finally detailed subclasses of risk. Insurance wants to sell good risk, public brings a reasonable level of insurance counts equal term level policy holds equal treatment. Categories from through your system like diagnosis with the customer die coverage, and then to cover you entire risk coverage through a state-based system and social insurance. And then three, social insurance, or I think I'm on four actually. Social insurance will not be used for bad policy, eugenics, desiring health, not the same discourse of population fitness. Reverse one, bad politics, well more than the goal and healthy and more desirable health, fitness is liable threats from within without national government the obligation to our contemporary bad policy, crucial respects. Rationalists are present no longer striving to take charge and charge of lives, even name that for all. The price national police, the government answer crisis, political media, assailants, health and disease has changed. Five, pay rights are necessary for building counter-hegemonic solidarity that's all about these claims, or build disparities so the rights have rights to produce new political subjectivity. 6, no rights offense. We left where the rights healthcare and essential medicine are good in a productive frame. There's no spillover. A right to healthcare is there's no spillover. Right to healthcare is a positive obligation to the government, which means all their individual rights. The arguments are not as persuasive as 7. Human rights are flawed. You're able to ask folks on committee. Actually, I don't need to read that card. 7, the alternative is austerity politics that results the rationing of care was the alternative causes it because it prevents federal health care spending from covering people who need care. This argument is made across 6. Accounting for networks of care cannot resolve their links. It does not challenge any arguments about the libidinal economy. There's a fundamental disconnect here. 9, no, like healthcare is a universal need. You cannot vote neg on people should not have healthcare. I spent so much time on case because none of their link arguments or the critique are persuasive unless they read all of their arguments psychoanalysis. 10, framework, we should get the apps offense. It's key testing on point discussion on the prosecute decision making. Also key in fairness is their infinite substance. And when you see 11, the affirmative is not a simulation of how best provide care, rather a rights-based advocacy that changes the very values upon which healthcare is delivered. In the context of debate, our process of deliberation is probably going to be good. 12, permutation, do both 13 permutation, uphold the right to healthcare to problematize exclusions in the imaginary. 14, permutation stops right to healthcare as a shift in attitude. A quote from the one is the alternative towards healthcare as per their evidence. 15, social rights, universal healthcare fights back against normalized epidemiology. Lloyd and Ted Barnum community health promotes energy, level critical conscience, protecting those libraries' desire for health promotion. The challenge of oppressive social radical to medicine, other social institute healthcare as sort of regards abandoned by seeking media long-term change. Work against normalized radical practices or political forces. Not only that, community health and family form challenge the advice by different under epidemiological paradigm shifts, not undermine biopolitical advice, biopolitical practice, nationalist health promotion, technical rather political issues, discipline, normal deliberation because market health practice is going to obsolete of our working for society, people needs about community becomes a market political society has made a defense change lacking healthcare. It's symptomatic of the continued radicalization of the state. Struggle for healthcare is not also obscure the structural protection of health and health inequities of health movements and not lines in place of health as autonomous individual rather than protection of health movements, connecting for community healing prevention, they confront the waste pipe, pollution, state craze, and sanction toxic bad living conditions for groups of people in the name of security. Mark that card of security.
Should we phrase it? Wait.
Anything you want me to say before we
You should link to the, like the all the
16,
says
link
good.
to all of their
It
evidence.
says good because we help.
Says it's
like
good.
the app is good for healthcare workers.
The app
which
is good
what
for
this is
healthcare
about.
workers. It's not mutually exclusive with ethic care, which means it solves the right to healthcare. We probably resolve this because it shifts the ethics care away from neoliberalism.
17. There is no symbolic order. Lacanian theory of language is hopelessly ahistoric, psychologistic, and biological deterministic. Fraser theory of discourse helps us how social identities, passion, alternative time, culture, have the dominant groups, society, security, identities, and complex being social and networks, interpretation, description, seriously for people, advisory, excused by people like to do simply women. When is this not against people's social identities, constructed, definitely fixed, alternative time, shifting, age, practice, affiliation, and gender discrimination, term discourse, face, power, sound, circumstance, how does ratification lines of race affect discourse, construction, social identities, ideals, how does deconstruction, service, ability, the monolithic web door, dominant groups, absolute top down control meaning, even under condition where nation 1% make the culture, structural conscious language is symbolic system, because abstracts for all the structural model expression, practice, agent, speaking subject, unless one left abusing their case reduce discourse, symbolic system, the structural as well, of active social agency, social cop, social practice, Lacanianism begins like viciously, circular course, describe process, tools acquire subjectivity, and the number of historically contingent trafficking of dominance. Curtis Marquette, historically contingent trafficking of dominance. Yeah.
So my first question is, you make this argument that this insurance disadvantage, you say the case outweighs the alternative. I guess could you explain this, I guess, in terms of what about insurance or the disadds the alternative?
The alternative one is mutually exclusive with the right to healthcare, we think.
Okay,
The
sure, yeah,
healthcare
I
is
guess why?
specifically good. Second, I guess the alternative skepticism and like my arguments about austerity mean that you can not provide a nationwide risk pool that funds healthcare for everybody.
Sure, okay. I guess my next question, you, make a lot of arguments on case about, capabilities and why that's different than the question of, why capabilities is different and resolves ableism. I guess, what does Denier mean by capabilities?
Yeah,
In terms of
capabilities
being different
is
and functioning?
a term like in both the one you see, the 2AC, the one you see, Ruger evidence explains it as like the requirements that are necessary for like human quote unquote flourishing, which
Yeah.
just means that it doesn't presume like I think that like put in the text
What's
the
a-
diversity of
what's a-
life
what's a
courses,
human?
but rather people should have
What's a
these things fulfilled so that they
Sure,
can live their
sure.
lives according
What's a
to what
human?
they. What is a like
What is a human?
What is a human?
Your card
Like one
says
whose capabilities
complex
should be
concept
met.
of human dignity. What is a human?
Like human as like people whose capabilities should be met. I guess.
What does that mean? How do you determine that? What capabilities make someone or
broad
something
definition,
human?
like all should be humans. Humans should be
So
humans.
everything is human? Well,
What do you mean everything? We do not give a right to healthcare to trees, for example.
Okay,
I guess that's
cool.
where the division can be drawn. Like, are we disagreeing
Sure.
about like the biological
Sounds
definition
good.
here?
Yeah, I just wanna know what you mean by human when you say the word human.
Beings, like residents of the United States in the
Okay,
context of who's
Sure, I guess I have a question about your, Vena Confirm evidence. It says specifically that justice begins from a conception of human health as a person's ability to achieve activities. And it says basic human activities. What are those basic
They
human
can,
activities?
this is our argument about capabilities and
Yeah.
function. This can be like
So what's
any,
that basic-
there is no
what's that basic-
normative understanding of what activities should be, or it's just a wide understanding of what they
Sure,
should
I
be.
guess, your, Fraser evidence, right, what about like a Lacanian analysis reifies domination?
Because it like prescribes identity based on this prior structuralist understanding.
What
which I
about the
think
one
is
AC
wrong.
prescribed, one NC prescribed?
I mean, like you could just like command def Lacan in the speech doc. Joseph and I did that during the one and see it pops up.
No, I
15
understand
different
we're
amounts.
Lacanian, obviously, but what about the analysis of the one NC structures identity onto anything or anyone?
It's a it's like
So it's just
a
a generic
critique of the
Lacan
structure.
critique.
It's a critique of structuralism as a way of
We'll,
understanding.
take prep starting now. confirm?
Yeah.
Stop for 617. The critique. For voting purposes, I'm going to do an overview, and then I'm going to answer framework first, and then go back up to the top of the 2AC.
Wait, so you're doing overview, then
Framework.
two, 2AC 10? Or
Yeah, 2AC
the
like
line
9 or 10. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, you know this sheet.
Thank you. I can just readjust this one. Thank you. Is anyone not ready to begin? Me. Cool. Is everyone good?
Yeah. Our Western evidence provides the framing for this round. The app changes nothing about what we collectively conceptualize as healthcare. They just advocate that everyone should have a right to it, which takes up the assumption on healthcare as a fixed object, understood to be something produced in hospitals and clinics using expert knowledge and expensive equipment, despite framing themselves as the answer to neoliberal health practices. The app has the exact same understanding of what healthcare is to market reformers. They just think their allocation mechanism is more efficient and effective. This ensures the continued restaging of the healthcare debate as an unresolvable feature of the political landscape. They delimit their horizons for reform by conceptualizing healthcare in such a way that locks in scarcity and excess demand as two major drivers of healthcare. Vote negative on presumption. 2, your ballot has no bearing on the passion of single payer or depth gaps in the healthcare system. Filter this framework and solvency claims through this lens. Policy debates, commitment to concrete proposals as pragmatism is only a fantasy to hide our agential incapacity. Debate is not doing things. It's talking about what we would do if we were something else. This mediation comforts us by making ballots into electoral votes. It hides a staunch passivity and investment in the status quo. Debaters live in a world where good things like declining rates of Ebola threaten their impact claims on the TRIPS advantage, and the new evidence about disparate health outcomes or cherished new advantage evidence. Rather than engaging contingent political struggles, the rhetorical space is condemned to repetition compulsion that yearns for the world to remain exactly the same as the status quo because the app would, because it would ruin the app's good ideas. To go to the line by line, I'm going to answer framework here. Reminder: the role of the battle is to analyze the libidinal investments of the one sees politics and presentation before considering whether its implementation would be a good idea. The role of the judge is to be an analyst. The app has presented their case. We have offered interpretation. The judge either agrees with ours and extends our interpretation through the validation of the ballot, or it does not. 2, our critique is entirely a framework argument. Getting to win the hypothetical impacts of the affirmative is a function of fantasy. The logic of fiat operates by keeping the desire for a perfectly just healthcare system alive without ever changing one, because if single payer passed, the good feelings of winning debate round stops. The top of the 2AR will be vote affirmative, so we can solve structural inequality. The only reason they will frame it this way is so they can do the next round and the next round and the next round. They hold people excluded from healthcare as objects of the app's desire. The impact is political nihilism, results upon and eternal emptiness. This is an impact to all of their dialogue standards that they made, or decision-making standards that they made below. 3, counter-interpretation. The app should defend their libidinal conception of what healthcare is. If they negatively win that, their collective understanding of what healthcare makes healthcare reform less likely to happen, then vote negative, even if they think the app would
hypothetically be a good idea. There are two standards for decision making. Obviously, our interpretation is good for decision making. You need to conceptualize what services and what you libidinally and collectively understand as healthcare in order to advocate for it once you leave the debate space. Two, it solves your predictability/fairness standards. What they consider healthcare is vital to advocacy skills. What services will they provide? If they can't answer these questions, just vote negative because they are unprepared. Four, framework turns the case. Objective political analysis detached from affect dimensions of the human experience turns the case. Evidence report 14. We do take issue with the admission that political can be studied without instance of interventions fully imposed in their basement political subjects politics reducing further technical practice technical solution will be in fact of no risk whatsoever. They would exact a wide range of which drivers policy cannot be effective to chance to be effective. Or the ill will be temperance and absence of features there enactment to evidence the sheer poverty of sensible measure of disasters don't be refined as way to read the sons of can actually self frame and all the future landscape of nature yet to be informed. They can actually self splice and become the understanding when we make them all their kind of strong permutations. There's a Karl wrote this out avoid of an underlying ethic to drive their institutional engagement and legalism. Their model debate creates white debaters who can master institutions for their own end. Their model produces Karl Rhodes who are able to use the institutional knowledge garnered from objective policy debates to orchestrate neoconservative nation in the Middle East. The line behind the first argument here is Erickson definition. Oh, no, I'm sorry. The first argument here is case outweighs. Our argument is that it assumes you get to weigh the plan, which our framework argument has problematized. This is the exact logic of the fantasy where you can avoid the contextual reality of the implementation, which we will critique. Two, reject utilitarian forms of calculus. Refuse to be said be exhausted by the calls of discourse. The one I see calls for relief human suffering, feed a self-reinforcing neoliberal economy created off of effective investments of suffering that ends up justifying endless interventions in the name of humanitarianism. Evidence reporting the human is a trouble. We not accept the idea that the most urgent question of our time is how to make human suffering. We are ourselves by discourse of suffering off translated pity and bias instead of pity ties in terms of moral supremacy, because we combine which interventions precede enter the souls living the interventions to sanction a removal of political agency on account of the need for something to be done to alleviate the suffering. Mark and suffering. The next argument here is the link turns the case. Our first evidence indicates that their model of anti-capitalist model of understanding healthcare system erases the informal economy. Feminized bodies become the foundation of their utopian single-payer demand. Their disavowed intimate forms of care are never considered under their model of political economy, which means the affirmative recreates the disposable population. The next argument here is Erickson indicates the alternative is an attack on private insurance. No, we don't privatize risk. Our argument is that this illustrates our link argument about gridlock between those who don't like single payer and who do are those who do. Our critique of public insurance is not hailed as any critique of public insurance under their interpretation is hailed as an enemy, which makes it possible for it to have any sort of compromise. Also, extend our alternative here. Our alternative proves solves the entirety of the case by affirming a diverse model of informal care networks. Your belt libidinally unsettles the fundamental terms that define the healthcare reform debate. The capital-centric understanding of healthcare buries the intimate and often feminized labor of care that makes a vast majority of healthcare actually received by individuals. This means that their single-payer utopia is reliant on subjugated double day of feminized work. This is the reason why the USSR and China, despite framing themselves as progressive with regards to gender relations, can only be functioned on a double day of women's work. Those that are required to have that feminized labor once you leave the base space. Also, we don't need an alternative. That's our last piece of Healy evidence. The evidence libidinally invested in the perpetuation of the status quo. Voting negative frustrates the repetitive iterations of fantasy by breaking the narrative flow of the patient. If we win our thesis stems about the way that we formulate desires, voting negative makes our politics likely because it fractures repetition, compulsion, and forces a recognition that only working elsewhere makes deliberation advocacy that makes change possible to political structures. Next argument here is that social insurance doesn't lead to biopolitical racism. That's not our impact, so we don't need to answer this argument. The next argument here is the response to rights being key to political subjectivity. No, you can extend our Healy evidence, which I don't think is answered well. The answer to free market link over there for the abstract and cruelly optimistic attachment to movements that hope to radically alter politics. Our Healy evidence says the debate over healthcare reform has been a regular feature of the political landscape in the United States for nearly a century. You could have heard this as haven't we heard this before? This single payer is not a new idea, but one that's reappeared as a product of fantasy. This means that those movements for free market, alt-right counter movements that cause burnout, political resentment, and nihilism. These facilitates a movement towards austerity and fascism. Single payer remains a false promise that inevitably results in totalitarian takeover. Think of the context of immigration debate, where Democrats have advocated for decades about having a moderate solution to immigration reform, but this inevitably results in a fascist rising to power and saying that I'll solve it for you, which proves that the fundamental analysis is one that devolves to a fall to fascism. The next argument here is that the alternative is austerity politics because we don't actually unsettle the limit investment. No, I did this above. The alternative is not austerity politics by advocating we rather advocate for a diverse economy. It's a new lens through which we view the healthcare debate. Instead of AB, neoliberal reform and Martin states amounts of medicine, it indicates that we take into account the informal care networks, the intimate forms of care that happens in that makes up the majority of care that happens in intimate spaces that are largely full on feminized bodies, which means that there's a feminized labor dissent to any affirmative, which means that they cannot weigh any of their inequality claims because they just reinstitute that inequality on feminized bodies. Also, you're negative. Also, even if you don't like the informal networks of care frame through which our alternative works, then you should just vote negative to libidinally unsettle their conception of healthcare because it's the only way to actually spur politics once we get the race space. The permutation bit. The first argument here is permutation of both. I'll read the Futaki link argument. This is idealism. Like the call for right to healthcare sounds like a really good idea. It sounds like the app is shooting for the moon. There's a reason why apps like these are so easy to vote for and debate, and why ambiguous political slogans like Obama's Change or Trump's Make America Great Again are so easy to capture people's imaginations. They make people feel good, but incentivize them to identify rhetorically powerful performances like the 2AR. To come cross-examination of the one you see was embarrassing on this question. They have to voice their advocacy from the contextual reality. Durable fiat solves aimless interpersonal reactions. The court will be able to ethically place healthcare centers. We will raise quote-unquote sufficient funds to pay for single payer without actually specifying how much money that is. Our friends hockey evidence indicates that splits between policy design and organizational reality operate to protect us from company in terms of unrealistic policies. This is a defense mechanism to keep these fantasy intact. This is a result of how subjects are formed through the mirror stage for the identification with the messy, fleshy thing in the mirror. The impact is zero policy fair. This is distinct from the gridlock claim on the other link argument. Our thesis claim indicate that the policies will always be embedded in a fucked up way because we will never divorce the fantasy and the justifications for voting for a single payer from the contextual realities of the way it gets deployed. Permutation proper. The alternative is to say no to the affirmative. It's a question of rhetoric. It means it's mutually exclusive. Even if they win, it's possible you still vote negative because it proves our divination correct. 2. Permutation is a question of framework. If we win our framework argument, then permutation doesn't make sense. Also, the informal economy of healthcare must not be seen as a supplement to the formal one or crushes all solvency. In fact, you should prioritize the diverse economy frame as a better starting point for the resolving healthcare crisis. The firm's key. Healy 6. Is easy to measure informal care governments and mere supplements and care providing the clinic standing out of the same real care takes place even the same complementary medicine services the adjuncts and the relation to benefit robust in these hours. Practice space are to be the one to be placed in some organization. They were escaping swept on the source or optimization rushing the list. They knew conscious understanding creatively reconsidering how these concepts and actors carried beyond for you lead to a completely different notion of healthcare reform. The next argument is a permutation of problematizing exclusion, though it's intrinsically ability to problematize exclusiveness is neither part of the affirmative or the negatives advocacy, which means that the choice they could literally add an infinite amount of blanks to the affirmatives. Advocacy makes it possible to be negative as a reason to vote negative on competitive equity. The next argument is permutation and shift attitudes. No, all of our literature disads, and this is sufficient to beat this permutation because we will prove that your attitude shift is not in line with our attitude shifts, which proves that you don't get this permutation. The next argument is the social right stops the normalization as per the Lloyd evidence. No, the alternative is not the communal health centers, a bad argument that your Lloyd evidence accuses us of being, but rather it's an argument about the libidinal conception of healthcare leading to gridlock, which means that this notion of community health centers critique is not our argument. The last argument here I need to answer is that link turns the case because they help workers. No, but this is exact solidification of the free market versus state-sponsored healthcare works that indicates that free markets will just say that we help workers more than you do. The last argument is no symbolic order, no, I'll read a card. The repetitive nature of the economy of tropes and enjoyment proves that psychoanalysis is falsifiable. Number 12. Look how rhetoric considered psychoanalysis scientific status critique psychoanalysis agree that analytic practice is not falsifiable. There's a relationship between the psychoanalysis and science. The question of the rhetoric is never far from conversation rhetoric. Awards economy not psychoanalysis status to science by broadening the mathematical volumes of discourse, systematic counter-trope, and social life. This subject of sense of word change drives analytic towards the empirical life of discourse. Mark the last card of discourse.
Is it qualities?
Yeah, empirical life of discourse.
Okay, let me just find it.
It's yeah, like halfway through the card.
Okay, we got it. Yeah.
Right. Good for us. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, just.
Yeah, I can just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a quick arch.
Okay, can you get those cards? Yeah. You can get those cards.
Just like 18 seconds, I think. I
Mhm.
would say.
1 second, Tim. Okay, I'm good.
Where you left off, the type of this Lumberg card, the repetitive nature of the economy of tropes and enjoyment proves that psychoanalysis is falsifiable.
Yep.
Is this lens of understanding psychoanalysis as falsifiable positivist, or is this something else?
I don't even know what that word means.
Like, how do we know that psychoanalysis is falsifiable for these passages?
Because of empirical examples of the way that discourse has been continuously restaged. Our argument also is that, well, TJ will make in the 1 and R, is that we don't need to win that psychoanalysis as a frame is necessarily falsifiable in and of itself, but rather we were a defense of Healy's specific articulation and analysis with regards to
what's the
psychoanalysis.
difference between Healy's?
Exactly. So
and
Healy does
the
literally a
Lumberg
century-long historical analysis of the way that the healthcare debate, specifically in the American context, has been continuously restaged as, oh, now we're going to swing to free market. No, now we need state-sponsored. These are two symptoms that interrupt each other's fantasies. Our argument is that the only way to libidinally rupture that conceptualization of healthcare as something that is produced in hospitals, produced by doctors, we need to take into account the informal sectors of care that take place in intimate spaces such as homes.
So obviously most people didn't go to hospitals 2 centuries ago. Why should we restrict our analysis to the past century?
I don't even know what that means.
Like, is Healy's analysis of the past century is the limit?
Healy analysis of the last century is the limit because that's what Healy chose to do.
That's what Healy chose.
Yeah.
In defense of why he chose that, or why we should be
Yeah,
applying
because the
maybe that right
20th
there.
century in particular is very important in the context of healthcare, right? Because we have a bunch of moments in the 20th century, particularly
Okay,
in the US.
I'm with you in that the 20th century is important, but why isn't the 19th century important?
Because the medical system probably solidified more closely with the introduction of new
The
technologies.
19th century
of
also
medicines.
probably flows neg also. It's just a question of how far Healy went back.
Yeah, I'm not seeing Healy.
Okay, fine with that. Your arguments about idealism and the affirmative, why isn't the negative idealistic?
Because we are not idealistic. Or I think the cross-section one I see really illustrates this point where you divorce the advocacy for a single payer from the contextual reality of the way that single payer gets deployed, which inevitably results in serial
Sure,
policy.
the reality and how informal networks of care are seen, why isn't
we don't fiat informal sectors of care. We rather are providing a different analytical frame through view the healthcare debate. So we're not saying like all care should be from feminized bodies, but rather you don't take into account those feminized bodies, which is key to unsettling and solving the gridlock impact argument.
About this informal economy of care, the Healy card and the permutation says that these desires, practices, and spaces are to avoid being placed in a subordinate position.
Yeah.
Goes on to explain that. Where does this indicate that we should not do like healthcare as something that can also be done in hospitals?
So yeah, that's not our argument, but rather when it's seen as complementary, then the informal care network is one that gets
What's the
instituted with all of
threshold
us.
for no longer being seen as complementary?
The permutation is obviously complementary. You have combined your formal networks with the informal
But,
analysis.
so if you're not exclusive with like normal forms of medicalization, why is it that?
So this argument is making that the permutation makes the alt solvency get crushed. Is the argument that card is.
It's gonna be, inequality, inequality, sorry, K real quick, bottom one concept, inequality first. Yeah.
Troops, I'm sorry, can you say that again?
The K right at the bottom of the Lacan argument, then inequality, and then troops.
Are you just gonna finish that card?
No, I'm just.
Okay, make it
I'm just
another
gonna
argument.
make another card.
Sounds good.
You're reading
Send
it
it
down.
I feel like some stuff. You know, I love post elimination NDT new apps. They're freaking amazing. I read a- my first NDT I read a Batman app round 8. The worst part was we hit these like Georgetown robots, so they just read back in the framework. It didn't even.
I like our boots. It's fresh.
I appreciate a little southern action.
Yeah.
Alright, everyone good? Yeah, good.
First Lacan argument, this argument's really dead. It's never actually a question of Western's understanding of the healthcare as an object. Their only criticism of Lacan is that he fixes subjects. That is clearly not our argument. If anything, we decohere the notion of the subject and they reify the notion of what the healthy subject is, which is why this probably links them. This is a generic Lacan and it doesn't actually link to us inequality. The voter is an independent voter, and a really easy way to frame your ballot, the one they see as an act of compulsory heroism, save the children narrative. They use as a moral truism to force you to accept their political ideology. We have a specific link to this on the K, where they have labeled the thousands of people that they supposedly save as a reason to vote for them. They turn suffering bodies that they have never met into a commodity for a ballot. This is a violent practice, and make challenging the theoretical basis of their argument impossible because they have weaponized the suffering of others to justify their ideology. It also is a direct turn to all of their permutations because the Boulder is really specific about how this narrative makes resistance, it makes dissent impossible, which means only the affirmative can be accepted within this frame because of all their demonizations of the alternative that you saw in the K. And also they really don't have any good answer to this on the flow. Their only answer is that the app isn't heroic because they're not overcoming. They don't give a warrant to this. They haven't answered the weaponization of suffering bodies in order for a ballot. They also haven't answered the decontextualization of the ballot. They have reduced this space down to a theoretical question of saving people, which prevents the ability for subject formation. Our next argument here is they have no clear answer to the medicalization, which is our monosing evidence, which is really good in the context of the affirmative. Their policy incentives are an expansion of what is medically necessary via cross-sex. This medicalizes social problems and gives an incentive for this medicalization. Our monosing evidence is really good on
on this question, the app results in things like the over-medicalization of black children in schools and the institutionalization of bodies deemed TV, in which we see throughout the history of the 20th century to reason their ideology should come before the actual action of the plan, because the question of what the ideology institutes and justifies also takes out all their arguments about rights, because all of the ability for the government to determine who is healthy obliterates subjectivity and reinstitutes the importance of biopower. Anders 13. While such subjects seek the intervention of the state to respond is further reformed by the institution to produce these subjects as effects of measures such as the ADA ultimately depoliticize these claims, but reinserting the previews of judicial institution convert social problems into matters of individualized entitlement, into matters in which there is no harm if there is no agent and not tangibly violated. Subject primary aspect core decision pertaining disability has been relied on medical knowledge core medical evidence of impairment as a sense of precondition for legal findings of disability. Disabled people are made subject to invasive examination, surveillance, and objectification that are hallmark obvious oppressive aspects of technologies of normalization. Social forces shape the environment in which norms are established. The effects technology industry contribute to psychological anomalies, institution primarily employ the model of exclusion of lepers rather than inclusion models of quarantine, surveillance, and regulation of the plague. Now, their really only game on this flow is this capacity model argument, which is the very crude evidence, but it still relies on the notion of the basic human rights. It ignores the power relations of the way the courts and the government will be the one who get to determine what those rights are, which means they had to don't skirt any of our offense about giving the government the ability to determine what is medically necessary and what is a right in the first place, and their evidence devastates them on this argument. Now, trip. Guaranteeing a right to health doesn't change the way patents will work on the international market. The right to health the 2017 regional and bilateral FTAs. The U.S. is currently using national health insurance in Western countries like France and Britain. Prove that countries like some patent law can ensure access to cheap drugs domestically while preventing the exportation of that internationally. Also, the U.S. will not actually enforce the right to health and won't stop their internal link. Their bot evidence indicates the U.S. signed the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights without enforcing the right to health. There's no reason why the Mexican plan will require the government to provide transportation, ensure equitable distribution of facilities, deliver services that actually meet people's health and needs, which proves exactly our link on the Fakaki evidence. The reason they don't get any of these advantages because they are isolated within the idealization of their plan is a good idea, but never understand the actual implementation of their plan within context. Now, the Hughes debate, it's a direct link to the affirmative, which is a move toward the healthy subject, which is all their question of the disease populations needed to be cured. That necessitates the idea of what it means to be human. Disabled life is never to be desired. Their move towards health is a disavowal of disability, which our use evidence is really good on. The affirmative makes it celebrating disability impossible, which is psychologically violent. This hypothetical disabled person just adds to the entirety of the affirmative because they talk about all these supposedly diseased populations and supposedly suffering people, which is an objectification of the disabled experience because they can only understand diseased populations as suffering, which is exactly our argument and leads to the disposability of disabled populations. There's a sacrificial logic, DA, to the entirety of the utilitarian calculus and the way the 1AC operates because disabled people, when healthcare decisions need to be made, when it is determined what is medically necessary, disabled people will always be behind the eight ball because there is an ontological and visceral reaction of disgust that delegitimizes the value of disabled life in the first place. Their interests really aren't good. You can group the Denier and their Bendano evidence. They both link to this notion of establishing what is the human in the first place. The Denier evidence is really specific on this when it talks about the notion of human rights. We have critiqued this notion of the idealized human because it always discounts the disabled body because even when the disabled people are considered human, they are not the ideal human, i.e. they are not the human that shouldn't exist in an ideal world. This is like actually ridiculous. Like we're talking about a first round potentially being the bubble team in round 8.
It's normal that at least one of them do.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true.
And so we're gonna be understanding.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like that's why round 8 is so nerve-wracking. It's like yeah, it's just amazing to me that actually, because they're debating Harvard AM, which means in the 4 pool right now, like 2 first rounds are debating each other. We had USCBO and Kansas KR yesterday. Okay, UBO was like truthful. They were 3 with 9 ballots, and there were 2 with 8. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry. There's 2 docs. I just highlight some stuff and put it in the doc.
Okay.
But the order is going to be the inequality advantage, the trips advantage, then the critique. And I'm just going to do straight down to his here. I'm not going to go explicitly.
So, inequality trips, okay?
Yep.
So the 1 AR doc is your cards, and the other doc is the heat.
But you can take a second to put them both in.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks.
Of course.
All right, good looks.
Okay. Anybody not ready? Millions of people are uninsured, which cause tens of thousands of deaths every single day because the insurance is the primary term link in order to ensuring people have access to care, which solves thousands of lives, even if it's not perfect. They say it is a form of compulsory heroism, whatever. One, they link to this. They link more than anybody in this round to this because they are under the assumption they can somehow break out of the healthcare debate by adopting some sort of role of analyst who's a dispassionate neutral observer that just looks at the one seat afar. But this is the most hubristic interpretation of this possible, which proves they are the idealistic ones by assuming they break out of this. At least we are proposing a plan. At least proposing something they can just like, even if it's not perfect, that's not a reason to vote so much. We more explain the frame debate. 2, none of this is the affirmative. We don't have a narrative of totalizing and overcoming the healthcare debate, which says that people should have insurance. That is literally all we said in the one to see and how we can use the rights framework to catapult in the future. 3, even so there's no effect on these arguments. The alternative is passivity and maintenance of the status quo. This is a diss side to them because it shows that they do nothing. They extend their medicalization arguments. They extend the vent to counter evidence. 1, health justice outweighs the affirmative found in health capability paradigm that is specified in evidence. The affirmative guarantees everybody has sufficient medical care to enable human flourishing. This conception of health starts from a person's ability to achieve activities, not their ability to avoid death, which proves it is not medicalized death. 2, health is intrinsic and instrumental. It should be preserved for its own importance, but also because it enables other activities to take place. This proves we not succumb to the case. We combine multiple fields. 3, the danger is not hotspotting, for example, black communities. The danger is that people just don't care about low-income minority communities and status quo. So rights frameworks are necessary. If the link argument is true, the government would already be using that set of populations they identified. Austerity demonstrates the danger is moving in the opposite direction, which proves it's necessary. They rated the Andrews evidence. However, they conceded on the K2AC2 Rose evidence crossplay. 1, biopolitics has changed. The government disciplines are not on the basis of healthcare. Discourse of a healthy national population, e.g. Nazism, gave way to a social welfare state that began to provide for people. These rationalities are no longer existent because society is too heterogeneous to create a single national identity, which is why there's no risk of an impact. The court does not determine the right to the affirmative is established within our see evidence. Even so, this is just an assertion with no piece of evidence to back it up or an impact argument. The TRIPS advantage. At the top, millions of people in the global south die every single year from easily treatable, tropical, non-communicable disease. TRIPS patent protection destroys the disease incentive to develop drugs to treat these diseases, removing the mosquito but domestic market development and generic production in these countries. That's the whole informative. It's external to the entire debate and saying the alternative cannot possibly resolve outside of these arguments with some disease. The analytics at the top are incorrect. Patents are bad for the affirmative rewrites that are bought. Evidence indicates the right to healthcare is the foundation, is what allows the United States to steamroll countries in negotiations. They acquiesce because they're scared of U.S. retaliation. So rewriting the terms of the agreement were largely necessary. They say we create disease and medicalize a healthy subject. 1, crossed by the Rose Evans I extended. There's no impact to this argument. 2, this assumes existential disease. We do not say disease is going to kill everybody. We said there are current diseases that are ignored in the status quo. 3, the affirmative is a massive link to a change of reorientation. It says we must focus on Ketonian violence. 4, the social model alone fails. Yes, we do not. Yes, people are suffering. However, we do not say that people are only suffering. That is to say that their interpretation closes the possibility of giving drugs to countries that will not want these drugs and are unable to because of the United States. This is a decided alternative because it dooms millions of people to end this suffering. 5, our 10-year evidence indicates that liberals contract framework can be sufficient to overcome any possibilities of these because it is inclusive fundamentally. Now the critique page. 2AC1, the critique, the case outweighs. All they say is you don't get the affirmative. However, you should vote for the ethic of the affirmative. Our better term in this case, you should prioritize global inequality in your decision-making calculus. The fact their alternative can do nothing to resolve the amount of drugs that are not given to foreign countries. The fact that those foreign countries in the global south are calling for those drugs proves our point that we must focus and turn our impact calculus outwards. They say we take utilitarianism. That's irrelevant. This is not a util argument. 2AC2, the Erickson evidence. The right to healthcare versus power relationships. It exemplifies a counter law that rewrites the books and
completely change the way the government approaches healthcare. There are Foucault, who Healy is citing. His whole point is that power relationships are reversed. That's why they're power relationships, not domination relationships. Power is not inherently good or bad. It's dangerous, and knowledge is crucial to politics and inevitable. It's necessary to change those power relationships, which is something the affirmative does. This is exemplified by our examples in the global south. They extend their Healy evidence. One, the affirmative embraces the care. First, Healy does not apply. Healy is not trying to write off all healthcare reform. Healy is exploring the limits of the current debate in the 20th century. Our whole point is the rights framework shatters that. They've not carved one on the question of rights. Our relevant evidence to the one he indicates that rights is a springboard and assumes that everybody has that. It proves that limited assumptions that their first time messages of rational after theory are impossible in us because we're not ACA or repeal ACA. We're saying everybody has an unconditional right to this. Social insurance are prerequisite to inclusion of care in our system. Naismith 2002 market economy central life can modify resulting just the money we allowed. Participants circuit realists brings have to burden social protection follows commercial margins populations marginalized population during their retrenchment in 90 days importance became pronounced. News access to the expected shoulder response to the effectiveness expectation to well-being of women. A social system well documented and active state essential future records of women not thinking marching bread roses retreated the same evidence by the which all social provisions the low income care women care privileges they are not screaming off although contradicting completely stated demands can be avoided by those women who are resourced by some assist with their unpaid work that the character of the non-interventionist stated myth God assumed that the powerful market force called upon to exercise tremendous power disposal those same powers be used to promote the quality of life for all citizens for large. They explain the alternative care of alternatives is nothing. It is platitudes. They did not explain how it can possibly change. Though we understand the care economy exists within the current debate because it still relies upon using these new models. They need to propose a concrete plan or else get steamrolled. Get steamrolled by conservatives. 2AC5, the rights framework is critical. This was largely explained above. They do not have any piece of evidence. They say we are like single payer. No single payer is this expansive and radical and based on an ethic of care which proves it is not applied. 2AC10, the framework debate, our framework interpretation. We get a similar case effects for alternative. We have to defend our liberal investments. They should criticize. That doesn't mean the debate is referendum whether or not we sexually desire healthcare will fail. Meaning the outcomes are planet good. You should vote for one. Key to fairness is 7 the 2 and C. There's no win condition for the affirmative. They can just criticize it with no alternative. They need to point out some flaw in the end. The fact that intrinsic terms are bad just proves our point that it's not move research or speech time. Fairness outweighs in terms of passivity arguments. The reason we do the activity because debate is a game. It's best for advocates. Our interpretation allows us to weigh impacts and criticize them and debate them. That is critical to breaking the totalizing frame of the current healthcare debate. It proves we solve all these terms. Even if we lose framework, vote affirmative. The link term of the perm prove our advocacy should not be rejected. All their stuff is good and psychoanalysis fails. 2C12, the permission is sufficient. The idealism link is wrong. As I explained, it's cynicism. We should have some forward projecting reform or else these things are inevitable. It's a reason why it's try or die in essence for the affirmative because they don't have any possibility of something. The Healy evidence is wrong. We don't footnote anything. Their own evidence agrees. This is a good idea. I'm just inserting a part of their evidence because Healy is talking about the necessity to have some change in the way we understand care. Not saying that all things will fail writ large. That's not a rejecting the affirmative. 2C17, the psychoanalysis debate. There's no libido drive to deny people health care. That's Fraser. Their Westerners should not frame debates about the NHS, about cutting the NHS. The affirmative or comes at one. Multiplicity. Structural linguistics frames assumes the individual is what signify rather than multiple ones. A person is as black as a caregiver as there anything else. It proves caregivers are not tethered to always being subordinate. And the affirmative can actually change the affirmative to parole, not long. Lacan only studies language of fixed entity rather than spoken practice. Just like vernacular changes, symbolic orders can change as well as proven by the affirmative. The Nicholas spoken language proves you should not criticize ideas. 3. Identity creation. Mothering and cultural representations create symbols as much as they reinforce them. Homogenizing history and structural abstraction makes the concept of symbolic order so vacuous. If we win this argument, it proves that permutation solves because it is not just ideal. It's not just like idealist and fails. Rather, we can change those structures of language.
617. Sorry. Like now. one error number 2 on the K, it says right to healthcare can reverse power relations. What card are you citing for that?
Oh, that was the Erickson card.
Erickson, great, thank you. Which permutation did you extend in there?
Permute both, between 6 and 12.
Thanks. You saying that's Dan earlier? Thank you. Also, thanks for complimenting my water bottle. But like, he just started speaking like
Yeah, yeah.
right when you did it.
I was like staring at it for a second, like, that's so very cool.
That's not funny.
There's 2 police officers just walking around. I told them they should not be here. They seem to be like surprisingly okay with this guy. We'll see if they leave.
That
Not
happens
be
at
the
way
first
too,
time that I talk to them.
that happens at way too many places.
Yeah, like,
Honestly,
why
they're
are
just
you- why are you
running
here?
jobs literally everywhere. Like, I remember there was like there was a time where like, I think we were at Weaver, and there was this cop just on like the 2nd floor, like the main building, and he was actually like listening through the door to Roberto and Jeff's speech, and I was like, what the fuck is
That's
happening?
terrifying.
I was like, what, what is going on?
I asked them first, I was like, officers, are you here for any particular reason? And they said no, and I was like, well, then we don't have you here. We're cool.
I mean, it's just because like seriously, I just don't think they realize like how uncomfortable they're gonna
No.
just make people like.
It's because they're invested in not realizing it.
Seriously.
It's upsetting. I'm not even like on Facebook anymore, I already post something.
case. I'll just follow the 1AR order on the critique.
What's
Sorry, you said the critique and then the case.
Yep, sorry, and inequality and then trips.
You don't have an overview, you're starting with page outlets.
No, I have an overview. Yeah.
Big deal.
Should be no longer than like 30 seconds. I will stop giving my speech if it's more than 30 seconds. Is anyone not ready to begin?
If you think healthcare inequality is a bad thing, then you need to vote negative because they're behind on how their model debate and justifications for their act make healthcare reform less likely. Policy debate hides our agential incapacity by pretending we are something we are not. This is a guise for hiding their complicity and maintaining of the status quo. Their model debate is a space for repetition compulsion where we actively root for disease spread to get worse and inequality to get worse in order to make their impacts more likely. Their impacts are dissents to an affirmative ballot. They're behind on the framing question how their model debate is problematic. Line by line, the first argument here is that the case outweighs no. Their framing of ethicality before deployment is the exact logic of our Fataki evidence indicates that you cannot divorce the ethicality from the way that single player actually gets enforced by the Supreme Court and the unethical Department of Health. Though healthcare as a right without dealing with the contextual reality is a defense mechanism used to shield the fantasy from reality. This results in serial policy failure where their framework doesn't actually make good healthcare policy, but rather they're clouded by their drive in order to keep the fantasy intact. Only voting negative can rupture the repetitive iterations of fantasy in order to break us out of this frame of thinking, in order to theorize healthcare alternatively. The alt can solve for these foreign countries that you solve for, but rather we don't preclude drugs to be exported to them, but rather their statusization of healthcare as drugs is literally the link argument to our helium, which indicates that this allows the restaging of the healthcare reform debate throughout American history. It's the exact same understanding of healthcare as Ted Cruz, as those on the right, that those as drugs. This literally creates the conditions for gridlock, where their framing of debate, the single-payer debate makes healthcare reform less likely, but also results in fascism, which is a conceded impact of the 1AR. This continuously restaging inevitably results in the democracy electing a fascist. This can be seen in the status quo, where Trump was elected to solve the immigration problem, which had been continuously restaged for decades. Proves that there are now single-payer, the impacts of this link argument outweighs the implications of single-payer, because you get single-payer, but at what cost? The cost of genocidal leader. The next argument is that the right to healthcare is one that reverses power relations and it ruptures the notion of conditional rights. No, a right to healthcare is one that re-solidifies power relations. That analysis was just done above because it literally just allows the restaging and the energization of the alt-right in order to root for and come out and support market reform, which means that you don't actually ruptures the power relations based on the way that you frame your advocacy, but also the alternative isn't an impact to biopower or power relations. So I don't understand what this actually gets you in this debate. Also, the right is our Healy evidence indicates that those that see healthcare as a right is literally the symptom for those that see healthcare as a market entity, and it's the flip and the vice versa. This exact logic of the Lacanian analysis of fantasy, where a symptom is always preventing the realization of your dream, or the realization of the actualization of juiceons, but that never actually becomes a reality. But which means that they are literally invested in the maintaining of the status quo libidinally and conceptually. The next argument is that healthcare is a prerequisite as per their Naismith evidence. No, the affirmative doesn't resolve the unpaid feminized work that is implicit in your single-payer utopia that your Naismith evidence talks about. This is internal nature to the income inequality arguments that they make on the inequality advantage, because you disavow that form of work as something that doesn't count as healthcare. Arguments that our alternative is one that reconceptualizes healthcare in terms of the informal economy, which obviously isn't a fiat affirmative, which no links to all of their Fataki arguments, but rather it indicates as a frame of reference, or a frame through which you analyze and create more creative policy analysis, which means that we can solve a form of healthcare inequality while solving for this sort of feminized labor. The next argument is the alternative creates a status quo when it takes part in the status quo healthcare debate. No, we don't take part in the healthcare debate, but rather it's a critique of the healthcare debate, is specifically is framed in the status quo. Or you need to read our Healy evidence, which is freaking fire. It proves that they say all our link arguments are questions of the pre-fiat nature of the affirmative, so there's no possibility for you to actually weigh their impacts when you're making your decision at the end of this debate. The framework debate, no, you should default to agential capacity conceded framing question throughout this debate, which means that your role of the judge should be an analyst. Our interpretation of the affirmative is that there will be no conceptions to make healthcare less likely to happen. If we win this link argument, then you need to vote negative. That analysis was done in the overview. The counter-interpretation solves fairness. They've conceded that defending your libidinal and collective conceptions of healthcare is predictable, i.e. not an unfair burden for a 2A to make, but also right to healthcare helps your advocacy skills when you advocate for the right to healthcare outside the debate round, because you actually know what these services and shit that you think of healthcare is actually provided. They've conceded they wrote this ad, which outweighs all of their fairness claims, because their model debate is one that gives white debaters the ability to come and learn the details and work as government, who can use that to orchestrate neoconservative and imperialist invasions of Iraq, for example, once we leave the debate space, which means that you should just have a theoretical lens of suspicion when you view all their inequality / moralizing impact claims, because this is literally a performance. The next argument is the permutation, because protection reform. No, our Healy 2 and C evidence indicates that when the informal networks of care are one that are conceptualized into and subsumed by and seen complementary by the form networks of care. They literally are subsumed. They could never stand on their own. Our alternative that solves the case, which means that their permutation is literally not even preferable, even if you give them to them. Are also our link arguments are turns the case that even if you think that it turns the case because there are Fataki evidence and our Healy evidence indicates that they make healthcare reform less likely. They say Healy concludes that policy analysis is likely. Yes, that's our argument, that you just have the wrong frame to which to orient your policy analysis. The last argument is that the economy symbolic order is problematic and homogenizes homogenized subjects. No, it's not specific to Healy's analysis, which is the only thing we need to defend. In this debate, they have not actually articulated the Healy specific historical analysis of the way that the healthcare debate has been historically restated throughout American history. They're behind on the specificity debate. Go to inequality. The Boulder evidence should frame a negative ballot. It was drastically undercovered that 1ER is the independent voter. The 1EC is an act of compulsory heroism because it commodifies these ambiguous victims and suffering for a ballot. Their weaponization of morality makes dissent impossible and serves as a front to justify their underlying political ideology. Two conceded impacts that aren't addressed in 1ER. First, it erases their agency and possibility of dissent, which not only destroys all their framework justifications for weighing the plan because they make debate impossible, but also proves a dissent to the permutation. De Boulder is really a good on this question. Only the by rejecting the app and opening up spaces for restrictive inquisition. Second impact is imperialized violence and weaponization. Extend Evans and Reed, their moralization becomes a violent form of politics that uses instances of crisis to create a rally around the flag effect that justifies empire. Think about this in the context of 9/11, how images of suffering were used as a justification for Iraq war. Trips. The alternative solves this advantage. They need to answer framework in order to weigh all of these hypothetical people that they die. Also, De Boulder answers this page as well.
How much?
Wait.
Thank you.
disavowal from the healthcare debate is bad because there are people who lack health insurance coverage and sufficient care now, which is an impact that we should reconcile with a vote affirmative, not because we are a continuation of the terms of the healthcare debate, rather we are a radical break in the permutation checks. On the other, a risk of the link. The only answer on the inequality flow is this argument, the commodification of suffering. They can see the link here that Joseph explained, which was the top of the one-year response here, that either the alternative is just a disavowal, which is a nothing, cannot resolve this because there's a non-unique link, or it's just a reinvestment in the same system because there's no alternative way to talk about the impacts that exist. There's no justification of imperialist crises because we're not talking about crises. Rather, we are talking about healthcare problems that exist in the status quo, which is not something that guarantees intervention, but rather it's an obligation on the U.S. to change the way that distributes its healthcare resources. Also, they're misreading their cards about heroism, not anything about representations of suffering, which just proves that the alternative links.
In lectures, they think they can overcome that.
They think that they can overcome this, which reifies that. So I'll just pull it through here. Trips. The alternative can't solve absent explanation of how this is a special. The alternative can't solve absent an explanation of how there are differences in the healthcare debate where the right to health is necessarily key in this instance for U.S. pharmaceutical protections, which allows drugs to be manufactured in the countries that they're suffering from non-communicable neglected tropical diseases, which is the reason why specifically a rights framing is back as it can be interpreted in this way. The critique. Two framing issues on the page. First is the amount of time single pair gets mentioned in the twin. You cannot draw an equivalence here. That's a point for a cross-ex explanation. We not when you see cross-ex, we not think that questions about funding and the extended services are important, as rather the rights framing is necessary key to reverse neoliberal conceptions of how care should be provided in the limits. Rather, a rights-based framing is a broader provision of care to people, which a broader provision of care and public financing, which is simply versus. Second, there's no terms, there's no explanation how the affirmatives invest in the healthcare debate. We have reasons why any link argument they have is a reason why necessarily investing in the healthcare debate can resolve arguments about insurance, because how we provide it is not something that has to be complex in a technocratic way, but it does require this kind of investment. The case always arguments, yes, we can agree with their ethics point, rather we should be forefronting argument to health inequality, which is dependent on this global inequality in the United States is something we should forefront in our analysis because it interlinks with other social crises, but the failure of distribution, which we should forefront, the disavowal from any kind of healthcare debate piece that we cannot come up with a resolve to this, which outweighs any other things that are about their impacts. You cannot extricate pre-fiat from post-fiat because it's just an advocacy of how we should be approaching these processes. We should be approaching from the point of state provision because there's an obligation to provide insurance because the state is necessary, which is an Erickson argument why social insurance is key because it ruptures any instance of power relation, which is the reason why we're not a reification of the same instances of status quo debates. The status quo debates the Erickson have is fantastic, but how it is something that is counter to the law because it ruptures the contractual relationships that exist in private insurance, which proves that the right to healthcare is a radical approach to the healthcare debate, which is why something is only a fringe movement. Single payer is still a market-based solution because it thinks it's like a bargaining power. The answer here is an argument how research the alt-right. This is just saying that we should allow our healthcare and the agenda to be held hostage by people like Ted Cruz and the alt-right because we're scared of their backlash. Obviously, if you think Ted Cruz advocate for the app, then you can vote negative, but that's clearly not true, which is all of our evidence for right to healthcare, whereas counter to neoliberalism, the alternative debate, they're not able to resolve it. They're not able to resolve our impact. We're not an argument that healthcare costs, rather an argument that healthcare provision, which takes out all of their link arguments. All of their link arguments. So any link they can get based on the libidinal attachment. I'll answer at the bottom here. They cannot just assert that we have a libidinal attachment to the status quo without a specific link argument. About which parts of the affirmative exist in the current healthcare debate. There's a reason why Bernie Sanders' Medicare for all is very different from a right to advocate for right to healthcare. They can see the misheard the nationwide evidence that the affirmative is a prerequisite to an ethics care because obviously we should move to informal care, but there's a crucial distinction here that a care should be provided to some, and the care should be provided, and some of it has to be in hospitals because people need this care, and it's incredibly expensive. The affirmative allows women who otherwise would be low, especially marginalized women who would otherwise be stuck caring for people because they cannot afford to go to the doctor, instead allows them to advocate for moves. The crucial argument here is that solidarity for the right to healthcare is a better political necessity. Elevated evidence. Framework. Our framework interpretation that we get to weigh and simulate the efforts that are alternative This is the middle ground. The some critique of liberal investment doesn't mean they can wish away the act, and just because there's risk linked to some big critique. One, the judge in framing these arguments, even they win every frame claim, does not win them the debate because very little of the critiques is privilege to give insurance to people. All they have is argument that says advocate for health insurance is bad. The alternative is big underexplained, but there is certainly the possibility we can advocate for health insurance and therefore win the permanent functions on the pre-field level. So I couldn't drop the role. The judge we said to debate is in a referendum whether we can subsidize our healthcare to that means you can be policy answer, assist, or anything. It doesn't matter because none of these identity categories when they get third way. That's the whole point of our psychoanalysis argument. For your psychoanalysis, you still give about whether or not the answer gay day through advocacy skills. They drop the return the whole critique for healthcare policy in the debate level clashing. It turns the call vote. This has encouraged us to research and think critically about the issues. Allows us to break for the closure of the status quo. ACA versus ACA, a repeal debate, which is also arguing about healthcare. Obviously, being at the permutation, you do very little here because they have no link specific to the content right to healthcare. It's efficient to check back any non-centering the informal care. Read the 2NC Healy evidence, which just says placing the informal common care subordinate is bad. Obviously, we don't place it subordinate, we can place them aligned. That's not the reason why hospitals are bad, rather, focus on medicalization is bad. The psychoanalysis arguments, yes, we're not specific to Healy's arguments, but Healy's basically an absolute con. There's two sub-points from the Fisher evidence. One year is that parole not law language is not fixed, rather, it's a collection of words, which means that we can break the terms of healthcare debate. The critique of Healy's is not started in the 19th century. The terms were different because hospitals were not places people live, which indicates that the affirms a radical break that's efficient. So do not just check out on these liberal economy arguments unless they have a basis for that.